This video is sponsored by Aura. Ten weeks ago I gave my Manjula Pothos a massive chop, and today we're checking in to see if my chop was a success and what the plant has done in the meantime. Hey everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My Manjula Pothos is definitely one of my favorite plants, and it seems to be one of yours as well. I get so many comments about this plant every time she's in frame. 10 weeks ago she reached the top of her moss pole, which means it was time for a chop and extend. So let's have a look at what happened 10 weeks ago. What I've done leading up to this day is I have cut a hole in the stem over here. That was just the other day, maybe 2 days ago. That way the cut can overly dry out, and when I pot up this bit into a pot, there is less chances of it rotting. There we go. Now, sometimes what happens, and let me twist it around again, sometimes a root comes from the top and goes into the bottom. All of these actually. So over here what I try to do is I try and free them as much as I can, so I just pull on them. Like look at this one for example. Whee! Happy days, that's a good root to save. And let's pull on this one. Okay, this one doesn't want to come out, so I just have to cut this one, which is okay. Now, if I try and lift this off, I'm sure there's more roots in there. Oh, there we go. That was good. See? So I've got two poles, that's the bottom and that's the top. What I actually want to do is I want to take the bottom and the top, I want to plant them together and then extend one of them. I'm going to plant this one to the left, so you're right, because this plant over here is kind of leaning towards the left side of the pole, if that makes sense. And this one is leaning to the right side of the pole. So if I now plant them next to each other, they're closer. And whoop, and that's it. Now I'm going to chop this up with more aeroid mix. I'll just extend the one that has the existing growth on it, and then the other one, once it grows new shoots, I'll just start and directing them towards the same moss pole. And I just connect the garden stake to the first pole using a couple of cable ties, and then take the extension and I pop this on here, and I also connect this using cable ties. Alrighty, so just to recap, basically the chop and extend is a process that helps me keep my plants at a manageable height, and I'm taking full advantage of the root system that the plant has grown within the moss pole. But you can also be strategic with your chop and extend, and at the same time double your impact by just planting the top right next to the bottom pole. So these should technically continue as nothing ever happened, just purely based on the root system within the moss pole. Now, giving your plant a big chop like that obviously induces stress and shock. In addition to that, just 2 weeks later, I also had to move house. Moving house means changes in conditions, which means that this plant had to go through even more stress. So my challenge post-chop and move is really to minimize stress for the plant so it can grow as if nothing happened. Talking about minimizing stress, I've been using Aura to minimize my stress and help me switch off after a busy day. Having two jobs, life never stops. There's always something else I should or could be doing. So sometimes I'm having a hard time switching off my brain at nighttime. That is until I discovered Aura. Aura is the new all-in-one app for mental wellness and sleep that provides the world's largest mental wellness content library and community trusted by over 7 million people. Basically, it's like Spotify for mindfulness. Now, what I really like about Aura is its customization. By a short survey at the beginning, you can let Aura know what you want from it, and Aura will customize the content to suit your needs and preferences. My two favorite ways of using the Aura app are meditation and breath work. There's so many different types of meditations available, like morning meditation, but my favorite is definitely sleep meditation. It helps me get to sleep every single night. And secondly are sounds and soundscape. For example, I found these rainforest sounds. I like to put it on in the background when I'm on my computer editing videos or answering emails, and that in combination with being surrounded by so many plants makes me feel like I'm actually in a jungle and makes work so much more enjoyable. Get started for free on the Aura website using my link in the description. It's aurahealth.io/SydneyPlantGuy, and the first 500 people will get a free trial and an exclusive 25% off. Thank you again, Aura, for sponsoring this video, but let's get back to talking about minimizing stress for my Manjula Pothos. Alright, before we talk more about this plant, I've noticed that over 50% of my viewers have not subscribed to my channel. Subscribing costs you nothing, but it really makes a difference for me. So if you haven't subscribed already, I would really appreciate if you'd hit that subscribe button and help me out. So let me bring the plant closer to show you what actually happened over the last 10 weeks, and then we can talk about why I think that is. First things first, it has grown these 2 leaves since the chop, and they are the biggest leaves so far. I mean, look at the size of this leaf, and it's not even fully done unfurling yet. Wow. Just to put it in perspective, the leaf prior to that was only about this size. So a significant increase in leaf size despite the chop. Now I also planted the bottom part and the top part next to each other. This bottom part has now reshot in 4 spots. Shoot number 1 over here. Shoot number 2 is over here. Here, shoot number 2. Shoot number 3 is this one over here, coming out of here. And shoot number 4 is this one over here, coming out of the top node, and it has already found its way onto the moss pole and has grown some decent sized leaves. So, this plant has actually increased in leaf size as a result of the chop, and I created 5 plants out of just 1. So that's an amazing result, and actually much better than I expected when I initially chopped the plant. So let's assess why that might be. First things first, I also want to acknowledge something that went wrong. You might be able to see some of these burnt marks over here and over here. Those burnt marks are because I actually decided to grow this plant outdoors when I first moved into this new house. And that was because I noticed that it was just not getting enough light to actually increase in leaf size again. It was actually decreasing in leaf size since I moved to my old apartment. So maybe a little bit of background. This plant has been with me in 3 apartments or places at this stage. My first apartment had a lot of light, like a lot of sun. And this plant, I started that plant in that apartment, and it got a lot of morning sun in that apartment. And it was continuously increasing in leaf size, with the biggest leaf being this one over here. I then had to move, and I tried to give it as much light as possible, but I also moved going into winter. So just purely based on the changes in seasons, the plant was exposed to less light, and you can see that from these big leaves there was a gradual decrease in leaf size all the way till this one over here. That was definitely probably half the size of the largest one that it grew in the previous apartment. So quite clearly this plant did not appreciate the reduction in light, and as a result of it, it started giving me smaller leaves. Even though I didn't even chop the plant was growing up its moss pole, building more roots. Technically the plant should have grown larger and larger and larger. But it all comes back down to the conversation about conditions versus care. First and foremost, you need to put the plant in the correct conditions, so correct light exposure, temperature, humidity and airflow and so on, to really realize the plant's potential. So when I moved here, I have even less light available inside. I thought, okay, if I really want this plant to thrive and get the best out of it, I need to give it more light. And I overdid it a little bit, and I put it outside in a spot that gets way too much direct sun, and it got burnt a little bit. So I had to change its spot again, and I moved it into the greenhouse right in this corner over here. Now the greenhouse still gets a lot of light, but not as much direct sun as that spot over there where I initially put it, because it's covered by some trees. But the greenhouse has perfect conditions. So basically the greenhouse is offering very similar conditions to a tropical rainforest, which is what these plants appreciate, these tropical aeroids. So, since I put it in the greenhouse, it grew these 2 leaves. So a huge change in leaf size. And obviously that has nothing to do with me chopping the plant. The chop should have really set it back. That increase in leaf size is 100% a result of me providing the plant with great conditions. I think I talk about it in every single video. I feel like a broken record, but it comes back down to the conversation about conditions versus care. So conditions, light, humidity, temperature, airflow, that is what sets the plant's growth potential. Care, so repotting it, extending the pole, fertilizing it, you know, what aeroid mix I'm choosing, watering it and so on, that just realizes the potential. Now since it's in the greenhouse, I do very, very little for it. It gets watered by the misters, and every now and then I go through it and hose everything down as well. Now I have to stay on top of the fertilizing in the long run. That's probably the biggest challenge in the greenhouse because, well, the hose in the mister makes it so easy. I don't really need to bring out the manual watering can with fertilizer all the time. So I think in the long run, that's my biggest challenge when it comes to care. But overall, the care approach for this plant is so easy because I'm growing it in the perfect conditions. Now, of course, not everybody has a greenhouse, and I also don't have room in the greenhouse for every single plant. So not every plant that I chop will be able to go into the greenhouse, and maybe not every plant would even appreciate the greenhouse. But coming back down to the principle, when you chop your plant, that induces shock and stress. So everything else you do after the chop, you should do in an attempt to minimize or reduce the shock that you just induced. So for example, if you chop it and it's the middle of winter and the conditions are getting worse and worse and worse, you're just introducing a lot of stress and shock, and then the plant is naturally already exposed to a lot of stress as a result of the worsening conditions. That's why people tell you to do your repots or do your propagations at the beginning of spring, because you just introduced a lot of stress, and the best way for the plant to deal with stress is be happy, healthy and thriving, and that is achieved by putting the plant in great conditions. So I do chops throughout the whole year. I just make sure that after I chop my plant, I put it in a spot in conditions that are as close as possible to perfect. When I get a new plant, that introduces shock. It came in the post, it was in the packet for a couple of days getting no light. That is shock that I minimize by putting it in my IKEA cabinet that has pretty much perfect conditions for these plants to recover. So introducing shock and stress is normal. It's the inevitable when we're trying to grow our plants larger, because ultimately it will eventually reach the top of its moss pole. We have to do the inevitable, but what we can do is we can make sure that after we had to do that, we're minimizing the chances of anything going wrong. So if you can't have great conditions after you chop your plants, maybe don't chop your plants just yet and wait for the better season, and so on. I hope that makes sense. I just really wanted to, first of all, show you the result of a chop and extend, and you know, proof is in the pudding ultimately, but I also wanted to show you that the propagation in itself and the chop and the cutting and all of that is never going to be as important as providing your plant with the great conditions that they ask for. Now let's also talk about this little bit. I've been obsessed with putting that bottom part and that top part together in a pot because I just find it so convenient and makes such a big impact on the plant so quickly, basically creating 5 plants out of 1. So this one was a bit unusual. I did not expect it to actually reshot in the top 4 nodes, but again, it's probably a result of it being in perfect conditions, having so much light available, and as a result of that being able to photosynthesize. But yeah, that was honestly a surprise to me. Now you saw that with the last shoot already. The last shoot has found its way onto that pole extension, and that's the goal. I want all 4 of these new shoots to grow and then find their way onto this moss pole extension, so that eventually I have 5 plants growing on that one pole. Once they reach the top, I then chop it and re-extend it, and so on. So it's a great way to create a multi-planted pole without having to set back the plant and start with single node cuttings again. So yeah, I really like this method. I've been doing it a couple of times now. I've been doing it with my Gigas, my El Salvador, I think there was some other plant, my Atabapoense. So I've done it with a few plants now and it's been working so well, and I think this is probably one of the more common approaches I'll be doing going forward. I hope this video inspired you to go ahead and chop your plants. I always say good things come from chopping your plants. You're propagating your plants and you're multiplying the joy that they can bring you. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks again Aura for sponsoring. Like, subscribe, leave a nice comment, and I'll see you next time. Bye!